created in the 50s in reaction to the Soviet Union launching Sputnik 1, which ignited a space race. Beginning with the Mercury program, NASA's focus on putting humans into space served as its most high-profile and arguably the most exciting facet of the agency. Mission-oriented manned space programs have been the prism through which we judge the agency, and mission orientation back 40 years ago excited a group of students to go into STEM education, which we now call it today, and got us a generation of scientists and engineers. The Space Shuttle, however, flew its last mission in 2011, and there is now a gap in domestic spaceflight capabilities. Instead, we rely on the Russian Space Agency to ferry American astronauts to the space station. The Bush administration began the Constellation Program to serve as the shuttle's successor, but President Obama canceled the program. Fortunately, Congress has continued to see the importance of the heavy-lift rocket system and mandated the Space Launch System in the Orion program in the 2010 NASA authorization bill. Dr. Pace, I appreciate your comment that the Stimulus Act appropriated more funds in one act than this country has spent on NASA since its creation in 1958. And budgets and spending are an example of priorities. And in terms of having the seeds to continue United States preeminence, not just in manned space programs, but in terms of science and inventions and everything else that goes along with it, ended up being washed away in a flood of stimulus funds. Now, as this hearing has highlighted already, the President's approach to human spaceflight lacks a clear mission, and he is relying on the success of commercial space, which I agree is vital, but has dragged his feet on pushing human spaceflight at NASA. I strongly support a public-private partnership for our country's space policy. However, it is up to NASA to develop the heavy-lift rocket because the private sector doesn't have enough funds to do it by itself, and that heavy-lift rocket needs enough thrust to overcome the administration's short-sightedness. Now, by canceling the Constellation Program, NASA has lost its international partners who supported a mission to the Moon. President Obama has taken a been-there, done-that approach, but we haven't been there for 40 years, and the international partners who would have helped us have never been there. If we cannot lead the world in space, China and Russia will inevitably feel the void that we left behind, and that will have a trickle-down effect on the number of people that we train as scientists and engineers to keep America's preeminence not in space but in practically everything else. So, Dr. Pace, would you please discuss the problems caused by the cancellation of the Constellation Program and what's needed from Congress in this current fiscal environment to ensure the success of the Space Launch System and Orion?
Okay. Thank you, sir. That's a tall order. I think one of the crucial things that the Constellation Program was supposed to do was to provide a smooth transition for the workforce and for the capabilities the nation had off of the shuttle program to whatever came next.
And we've lost that now.
And we've lost that. And the deep integration between low Earth orbit and farther destinations that was hoped for, I think, is also gone. So I would first say that 2012 is not 2008. We're in a different and new situation today, and we have to look at going forward. One of the primary problems, though, with the end of Constellation was, again, cutting ourselves off from our international partners who didn't see how they were going to participate, increasing risk to the International Space Station, because while we certainly hope for and encourage and want to see the private sector take over that work, if there are delays, if there are problems, we don't really have a fallback option. So we are down to really a few critical paths for supporting the station. And so the complementary nature between commercial programs and the Constellation Program, I thought, was one of its strengths. The lack of a clear rationale for human exploration beyond the International Space Station is another serious problem. The Administration's approach of being capability driven, while it has a certain logic to it, it also has a lot of vulnerabilities. And historically, I think that a more strictly geopolitical approach, such as I have talked about a post-Cold War approach for leading international cooperation, would in fact be a better approach for the United States. There are some others that one could take, but simply talking about capabilities absent a strategic rationale that's integrated with other U.S. national interests, I think is a very, very fraught path, as we're seeing today.
Thank you. My time has expired.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Minnesota.